He thought leaving his father behind was just a difficult choice. I thought that money, success, and recognition were worth more than blood ties. But when fate knocked on his door, he discovered that some wounds never heal, and that karma never forgets. Prepare yourself for a story of regret, loss, and the weight of choices. If you believe that everything we do comes back to us one day, this story will resonate with you. Subscribe now, leave a like, and watch until the end, because the ending will make you think. The small house in the Villa Aurora neighborhood seemed frozen in time. The walls, painted a pale yellow, were already showing signs of wear. The gate creaked as it opened, and Rodrigo hurried in, holding his cell phone to his ear and his work backpack over his shoulder. The familiar aroma of freshly brewed coffee enveloped him, but he barely noticed. He was in a hurry, as always. Mr. Ernesto, 68, was in the kitchen, slowly stirring the beans in the pot. His curved spine betrayed the pain he endured daily, but he still tried to maintain the same routine he'd had since he was young. When he saw his son enter, he cracked a smile. "You're early today, son." His voice was hoarse, but it held a sincere affection. Rodrigo just nodded, looking away. "I had a meeting canceled," he said dryly, as he typed something on his cell phone. Ernesto sighed. His son had seemed distant for some time now. Ever since Rodrigo's mother died 5 years ago, their relationship had grown fragile. Ernesto tried to compensate for his wife's absence by being present, but Rodrigo seemed increasingly uncomfortable with his father's dependence. "I made beans just the way you like them, with sausage." Ernesto tried to make conversation. "I'm not having dinner here tonight, Dad," Rodrigo replied, still looking at his phone. "I have an important appointment." The silence that followed weighed heavily on the kitchen. Ernesto stirred the beans more slowly. He wanted to say so many things, but he was afraid of alienating his son even further. Since childhood, Rodrigo had always been ambitious. When his schoolmates dreamed of vacations, he talked about being rich, owning an imported car, living in a luxury apartment. Ernesto, a former bus driver, did what he could to support him, but he always feared that his son's ambition would turn into contempt for the little they had. "You work too much, Rodrigo," he said finally. "Sometimes I think you don't even like staying at home anymore." Rodrigo put down his cell phone for a moment and looked at his father. "Dad, life doesn't wait. If I don't dedicate myself now, I'll be like you, stuck in a job that leads nowhere." The words cut deeper than Rodrigo had imagined. Ernesto looked away, swallowing hard. He didn't want to argue. He didn't want to cry in front of his son. He just nodded and continued stirring the pot. Rodrigo worked as an analyst at a multinational company downtown. It wasn't his dream job, but it paid well and offered opportunities for advancement. He stood out for his dedication, but this also meant long hours away from home. Ernesto, on the other hand, was retired and living on a modest pension. The difference in pace between the two was enormous. At night, while Rodrigo went out to meet work colleagues at a fancy bar, Ernesto sat alone in the living room, watching the same TV shows he'd watched for years. The sound of the host's laughter was the only thing filling the silent room. The old man wondered if he'd made a mistake in raising his son. Had he been too permissive? Or perhaps too strict? He didn't know. He could only feel the distance growing with each passing day. One morning, Ernesto woke up with a sharp, intense pain in his chest. He had to lean against the bedroom wall to keep from falling. With effort, he managed to reach the phone and call Rodrigo. "Father." The son's voice sounded sleepy. I don't think I'm okay," Ernesto said, trying to control his breathing. "It hurts here in my chest." Rodrigo looked at his watch. It was only 6 in the morning. He had an important meeting at 9. "Dad, call Samu. I can't miss today," he replied, trying to sound calm. "I'll try to stop by later." Ernesto hung up the phone with the feeling his son wouldn't come, and he didn't. He called Samu alone and spent part of the day in the hospital. The diagnosis was angina, a heart problem. The doctor recommended monitoring and tests, and warned about the need for family support. Rodrigo arrived home late, his jacket wrinkled and his face exhausted. He found his father sitting at the kitchen table holding the prescription pad. "You need to take better care of your health," he said, worried. "I know," Ernesto replied, "but I can't do it alone." Rodrigo looked away. The weight of the sentence was uncomfortable. He knew his father was asking for more than help with medication. He was asking for presence, something he wasn't sure he could offer. The following weeks were marked by small tensions. Ernesto tried to get closer, but Rodrigo withdrew. Every time he invited him to dinner, his son responded with excuses: work, meetings, networking. With every conversation about the past, Rodrigo became irritated. He didn't want to remember the difficult years, the debts, his mother's death. He wanted to look ahead, to build the life he'd always dreamed of. One day, Rodrigo received a job offer in another city. The salary was almost double what he was earning. The position a significant promotion, but it meant moving to a state nearly 1,000 miles away. When he told his father, Ernesto was silent for several seconds. Finally, he asked, "And me, Rodrigo? What will become of me?" "Dad, I need to think about my life," the son replied. "You're an adult. You know how to handle yourself." "I'm old, son. I'm sick." Ernesto's voice cracked. "I can't be alone." Rodrigo felt a lump in his throat, but he didn't want to show it. "I can't miss this opportunity. You understand, don't you?" Ernesto didn't answer. He simply got up from the table and went to his room. Rodrigo heard the door lock. He wanted to knock and apologize, but he decided to wait. There was always a later. The following week, Rodrigo packed his bags. He tried to keep the house tidy and the refrigerator stocked. He left some money in an envelope on the table, along with a note. "Dad, I need to move on. I promise to call you often. Take care. I love you." Ernesto read the note alone, his hands trembling. Tears fell silently. He knew this wasn't just a temporary goodbye. He knew that for Rodrigo, this departure was the beginning of freedom. But for him, it was the beginning of a loneliness that would slowly consume him. At that moment, something broke inside the old man. It wasn't just his fragile heart. It was the knowledge that he had raised a son incapable of understanding the value of presence, of family, of simple love. Rodrigo closed the apartment door without looking back. He believed he was doing the right thing, that one day he could bring his father to live with him in a better house, in a bigger city. But deep down, he knew this was just an excuse. He wanted distance. He wanted to be free of the burden. And that's how the abandonment began. A seemingly justified act, a decision Rodrigo thought was temporary. But fate was already moving, silently, preparing the consequences. Because karma, even if late, always finds its way back. Rodrigo didn't look back when the apartment door closed. His heart pounded, not with sadness but with anxiety. For the first time in years, he felt free. Free from the silent pressures, the conversations about the past, the nights interrupted by his father's medication. He wanted more from life, and this move felt like the beginning of everything. At the bus station, he sat down in the bus seat, his hands still shaking. He took out his cell phone and typed a short message to Ernesto. "Dad, I'm already, on the bus. Take care. I'll call you when I get there." There was no answer. Rodrigo considered calling but decided against it. Silence would make the goodbye easier. The new city was everything Rodrigo had always wanted. Modern buildings, bustling streets, a 25th floor office with panoramic views. The company offered benefits he'd never imagined: comprehensive health insurance, generous bonuses, and opportunities for advancement. Within his first month, he found himself surrounded by colleagues as ambitious as himself, people who talked about investments, international travel, and career goals. The first few days were intense. Rodrigo threw himself into work, body and soul, barely thinking about Ernesto. He called his father once a week for quick 5-minute conversations. "Is everything okay over there, Dad?" he asked. "I'm fine, son," Ernesto replied, but his voice sounded tired and distant. Rodrigo promised to call more often, but he never followed through. There was always a meeting, a happy hour, a business trip. Ernesto, for his part, was trying to adapt to his loneliness. His son's absence weighed heavily, especially at night, when the silence of the apartment seemed to scream. He cooked small portions of food, often eating alone at the table, staring at Rodrigo's empty chair. He began going to the neighborhood health clinic more often. His chest pains were coming more frequently, but he didn't tell his son. He didn't want to be a burden. One afternoon, Rodrigo received an unexpected call. It was Dona Tita, his father's neighbor. "Rodrigo, I'm sorry to bother you." The woman's voice was distressed. "Your father was unwell today. He fell on the sidewalk and we had to call an ambulance." Rodrigo felt a chill in his stomach. "Is he okay?" "He's in the hospital. The doctor said it was a sudden illness, but he's very weak, son." Rodrigo promised to visit, but postponed the trip twice. Work was demanding, and he didn't want to show weakness by asking for leave. When he finally managed to go 2 weeks later, he found Ernesto thin and haggard, but still smiling at the sight of his son. "You came," said the old man, holding Rodrigo's hand. "Of course I came, Dad," he replied, trying to hide his guilt. "How are you?" "Better now," Ernesto said softly. "I miss your company, son." Rodrigo looked away. "Me too, Dad. But I need to dedicate myself to work. I want you to be proud of me." Ernesto simply nodded, but his expression said something else. He knew his son wouldn't return. And deep down, he was beginning to accept that he would spend the last years of his life alone. Time passed. Rodrigo visited his father 2 or 3 times a year, always on quick trips. He brought expensive gifts, new clothes, electronics, as if that could make up for his absence. Ernesto was grateful, but the sparkle in his eyes was increasingly dimmed. Dona Cita, the neighbor, tried to fill the void. She brought food, chatted, and helped with the shopping. "That boy needs to be more present," she said. "There's only one father." Ernesto smiled sadly. "He has his own life. I don't want to get in the way." Rodrigo, on the other hand, felt increasingly distant. Professional success brought a certain comfort. He bought a new car, rented a modern apartment, and started frequenting upscale places. He had friends, fleeting relationships, and a busy schedule. But in quiet moments, the image of his father alone in that old apartment lingered in his mind, like a shadow. One day, Rodrigo received a call that would change everything. It was Dona Tita again. "Rodrigo," her voice trembled. "Your father was hospitalized. He fell at home and was on the floor for hours. We only found him because we found the silence strange. He's in critical condition." Rodrigo felt his world spin. He caught the first available flight and arrived at the hospital in the early evening. He found Ernesto unconscious, on life support, his face pale. The doctor explained that he had suffered a heart attack and that his chances of recovery were slim. Rodrigo held his father's hand, tears streaming silently. "I'm sorry, Father," he whispered. "I should have been here." But Ernesto didn't respond. He was breathing heavily, his eyes closed. Rodrigo spent the night at his bedside, remembering the moments he could have done differently. He thought about the missed calls, the postponed visits, the empty promises. The next day, Ernesto woke up for a few minutes. "Son," he murmured. "I'm here, Dad." Rodrigo squeezed his hand. "I won't leave you anymore." Ernesto gave a weak smile. "Take care of yourself. And don't forget who you are." That was the last thing he said. Hours later, he left in silence. The funeral was simple. Few friends and neighbors attended. Rodrigo felt the weight of every disapproving look. He knew he had failed as a son. He tried to convince himself that he had done what he needed to do to have a better life. But the guilt was a lump in his, throat. Back at his father's apartment, Rodrigo found a box on the kitchen table. Inside were old photos, letters Ernesto never sent, and a notebook. On top of the pile was a handwritten note. "Son, if you're reading this, it's because I'm gone. I want you to know that I've always been proud of you. I just wish I'd had more time with you." Rodrigo sat at the table and cried like he hadn't cried in years. Each page of the notebook was a record of love. Memories of Rodrigo's childhood, words of encouragement, prayers asking for protection for his son. On one page, an underlined sentence: "There is no point in gaining the world if you lose yourself." In the following months, Rodrigo returned to work, but nothing seemed to have the same spark. Friends drifted apart. Relationships ended. He felt a deep void, something that professional success couldn't fill. One day he received a letter from the lawyer handling the inheritance. His father had left him the apartment and a small savings account. But along with this came an unexpected revelation. Ernesto had donated part of the money to a nursing home in the city, the same one he himself visited to provide care to abandoned elderly people. Rodrigo went to the location and spoke to the director. "Your father came here every week," she said. "He said he understood their pain because he felt alone too. He was a good man." Rodrigo felt immense shame. He realized that while he sought recognition, his father found meaning in helping others, and that in the end he had died with more dignity than he ever could. Little by little, Rodrigo began to change. He began visiting the nursing home, talking to the elderly, offering help. But nothing could erase the feeling that he had wasted the time he had with his father. Guilt was a constant shadow, reminding him every day of the price he paid for his choices. He knew he could try to be better from then on, but he also knew that karma had already taken its toll, and that some wounds never completely heal. Rodrigo believed that time healed everything. After Ernesto's funeral, he threw himself into work with greater intensity, as if routine could erase the pain. But it wasn't easy. The apartment he'd inherited from his father was empty, and he decided to rent it out to avoid facing the loneliness that permeated those walls. He now lived in a luxury condominium with a pool, gym, and party room. From the outside, his life seemed perfect. The company he worked for was, growing, and Rodrigo was one of the executives most highly regarded by the board. At 38, he earned a salary that supported an enviable standard of living. He enjoyed imported cars, international travel, and expensive restaurants. He was invited to networking events and met influential people. Some colleagues even commented that he was a model of success. Rodrigo clung to that. He wanted to believe that all those sacrifices, including leaving his father alone, had been worth it. But in the silence of his modern apartment, he felt the emptiness growing. The achievement seemed temporary, the applause fleeting. Still, he pretended to be fine. On one of his business trips, he met Isabella, a brilliant architect with an easy smile and a determined gaze. She seemed to see Rodrigo in a way no one else did. He felt comfortable with her, almost as if he could let his guard down. They began dating frequently and were soon living together. 2 years later, they married in a lavish ceremony. Rodrigo believed he was finally building the life of his dreams. Isabella was a companion, fun and also ambitious. She seemed to share his goals: stability, achievements, recognition. But there was something different about her. Isabella valued her family, had a close relationship with her parents and siblings, and called them almost every day. This bothered Rodrigo more than he cared to admit. "You talk to your parents all the time," he commented one night while they were having dinner. "And that bothers you?" Isabella laughed. "Rodrigo, they're my family. It's natural to want to share my day with them." Rodrigo tried to hide his discomfort. "It's nothing. I'm just not used to it. He wasn't there. After Ernesto's death, he had severed almost all family ties. He rarely spoke to his cousins or uncles, and he didn't attend family gatherings. Isabella's contact with her parents brought back an uncomfortable reminder of what she had lost, or left behind. The marriage seemed perfect on the surface, but cracks began to appear. Rodrigo spent more and more time at work, while Isabella felt lonely. She tried to talk to him, but he always changed the subject. "Are you running away from something?" she asked one night. "Of course not. I'm just focused on the company. I want us to have security in the future." "Rodrigo, there's no point in building a future if we don't live in the present." Her words echoed like a painful reminder. He thought of Ernesto. How many times had his father asked only for his presence? How many times had he promised that one day he would have more time? But Rodrigo pushed the thought away. He didn't want to face the guilt. At work, Rodrigo was promoted to director. This achievement came with a generous bonus and more responsibilities. He now traveled even more, managed million-dollar contracts, and was on the radar of the company's top management. Many envied him, but with each new professional victory, he felt more distant from Isabella. She, in turn, began spending more time with family and friends, filling her husband's absence with other presences. It was at Isabella's birthday dinner that Rodrigo noticed something strange. She was laughing with her friends, seemingly happy, while he felt like an intruder. Suddenly, he was overcome by a feeling that he no longer belonged in that world. On the way home, the silence between them was almost palpable. "You seem distant," said Isabella. "Maybe it's you who's distant," Rodrigo replied, defensively. "Rodrigo, I try to get closer, but you won't let me. I don't know what else to do." Rodrigo wanted to tell her he loved her, that he needed her, but he couldn't. He felt stuck, unable to open up. He carried a burden he'd never shared with anyone, the regret of abandoning his father. It was like an open wound, and he feared that if he touched it, everything would fall apart. One day, Rodrigo received a letter from the nursing home Ernesto often visited. It was an invitation to participate in a charity event honoring donors. His father's name was on the list of honorees. Rodrigo was stunned when he read it. Ernesto had never spoken about giving, but now he discovered that part of the small savings he inherited came from a generous heart. He decided to go to the event. He arrived alone, without telling Isabella. At the nursing home, he was warmly welcomed by the staff and elderly people who had known Ernesto. Many spoke of his kindness, how he brought joy to those whom no one else would visit. "Your father was special," said the nursing home director. "He understood the loneliness of these people like no one else. I think, in a way, he felt the same way." Rodrigo swallowed. He felt small. He thought about how much he could have been by his father's side, but he wasn't. From that day on, Rodrigo began visiting the nursing home regularly. He talked to the elderly and helped financially when he could. But while it did some good, it didn't fill the void. It was as if I was trying to make up for something that could no longer be made up for. At home, things with Isabella were getting worse. Arguments became frequent. She wanted children, but Rodrigo always put off the conversation. "Now is not the time," he said. "We still have a lot to achieve." "Rodrigo, when will it be time?" she asked, frustrated. "You're repeating the same mistakes, living only for the future. And when the future arrives, what will we have?" Rodrigo didn't respond. He felt trapped in a cycle he didn't know how to break. It was then that the news hit like a blow. The company he worked for was being investigated for tax fraud. Rodrigo, as director, was one of the first to be preventively removed. He denied any involvement, but the press had already splashed his name across headlines. He lost contracts, lost the respect of his colleagues, and lost his job. When he arrived home that night, he found Isabella packing her bags. "I can't do this anymore, Rodrigo," she said, tears in her eyes. It's not because of the crisis at the company. It's because you closed yourself off to me. I tried, but you won't let me in. Rodrigo begged, but it was too late. She left, taking only a few clothes and souvenirs. The apartment, once bustling with life, became as silent as Ernesto's old home. Rodrigo spent weeks in a state of torpor. He no longer had his job, nor his marriage. His friends were gone. He spent hours staring at the ceiling, remembering his father's last words. Don't forget who you are. But who was he now? A man who had conquered everything and lost everything, a son who had abandoned his father, a husband who had never known how to love. Visits to the nursing home became more frequent. He grew attached to those people as if they were family. In one conversation, a blue-eyed lady, Donna Marlene, said something that resonated with him. Son, we only understand life when we look back. But there's not always time to fix what we didn't do. Rodrigo knew she was right, and he knew the worst was yet to come. Rodrigo woke to the sound of the intercom ringing insistently. He was lying on the couch, his clothes wrinkled, his mind still clouded by the few hours of sleep. Since Isabella's departure and the scandal that destroyed his career, life had been about surviving each day. Mr. Rodrigo, it's from the post office. It's a registered delivery. He struggled to his feet and went downstairs to get the package. It was a small plain cardboard box with a return address he didn't recognize, São Miguel Nursing Home. His heart raced. It was the nursing home Ernesto visited frequently. He climbed the 2 flights of stairs, nearly tripping, and ripped open the packaging as he entered the house. Inside was a manila envelope with his name handwritten in familiar script. The tremor in his hands increased as he recognized the handwriting was his father's. He carefully opened the envelope. Inside was a letter and an object wrapped in an old cloth. He sat down at the table, took a deep breath, and began to read. Son, if this letter reached you, it's because I couldn't deliver it to you in person. It's not a letter of demand, nor of bitter regret. It's simply a letter from a father. I know our lives took different paths, and I understand that you were searching for something greater. I also pursued my dreams when I was young. But along the way, I learned that the greatest treasures lie not in positions or achievements, but in the people we choose to love. You grew up, Rodrigo, and I was proud of every step you took. Even when I missed you, even when the silence hurt, I told myself, he's going to be a great man. I know the world is hard. I know you carry guilt you might not confess. But I want you to know, I forgive you for everything. I always have. He didn't want the weight of the past to steal his present. Inside, you'll find something that's been in our family for generations. It's not worth money, but it has a greater value. Use it as a reminder that what truly matters should never be left behind. With love, your father, Ernesto. Rodrigo placed the letter on the table and opened the small package. Inside, he found an antique pocket watch, its cover engraved with the initials, EB. It was the watch he had seen his father put away so many times, but which he had never used. Ernesto used to say that that watch marked the time of those who knew how to wait. Rodrigo held the object to his chest and, for the first time in months, cried uncontrollably. The tears washed away the guilt that had accumulated over the years. He realized he was still seeking recognition, success, achievements, but all of it felt empty without his father's presence. Inside the envelope there was also a key and a small note. This key opens the chest in the old room. There you will find the rest of our story. Rodrigo felt a shiver run down his spine. He knew Ernesto kept a wooden trunk in his room, but he'd never been interested in its contents. He drove to his father's old apartment. Opening the door, he was overcome by the familiar smell, a mixture of aged wood and brewed coffee. The silence was almost sacred. In the bedroom, he knelt before the trunk. The key turned with difficulty in the lock. Lifting the lid, he found stacks of notebooks, old photos, and newspaper clippings. Each item seemed to tell a part of a story he hadn't heard. One of the notebooks caught his eye. On the cover, in faded letters, was written, Rodrigo, Memories. He opened the first page and found notes about his birth, his first words, his achievements at school. Ernesto had recorded everything. Every important moment of his son's life was there. There were even letters Rodrigo had written as a child, carefully preserved. Later, he found records that surprised him, donations Ernesto had made to the nursing home and other institutions, even with limited resources. Letters of thanks from families he had helped anonymously. Rodrigo realized that his father had led a life of true generosity, while he himself had lived a life centered only on himself. As he leafed through the notebooks, Rodrigo felt a mixture of pride and shame. He remembered all the times he had put work above family, all the excuses for not visiting his father. Now he understood that Ernesto had never truly been alone. He had chosen to be with those who needed company. When closing the trunk, Rodrigo found one last envelope, smaller, with the words, "For when you are ready," written on the front. He opened it carefully. Inside was an address and a sentence. "Someone is waiting for you." The address was in a humble neighborhood in a neighboring town. Rodrigo had no idea what he would find, but something inside him told him he had to go. The next day he drove to the place. It was a simple house with a small front yard. He rang the doorbell and waited. A middle-aged woman opened the door, surprised to see him. "You must be Rodrigo." "It's me. Do you know me?" "Your father spoke highly of you. Please come in." Rodrigo entered the house, his heart racing. In the living room there were photos of several smiling people, including one of Ernesto at a barbecue with a group of young people. "Who are they?" he asked. The woman smiled. "They are the boys from the project your father founded. He helped homeless youth. He paid for courses, gave them food, and offered them temporary housing. Ernesto was like a father to many here." Rodrigo remained, silent, trying to process that information. "He never told me," he murmured. "He didn't want you to feel guilty. But now you can continue his legacy if you want." Rodrigo looked around, feeling something different blossom within him. For the first time in years, he felt he had a greater purpose. In the following days, he began visiting the project regularly. He helped with activities, talked with the young people, and organized donations. Every smile he received seemed to heal a part of the emptiness he carried. He still missed his father, still regretted abandoning him, but he understood he needed to turn that pain into something positive. Ernesto had given him the opportunity to do things differently. Rodrigo knew that life would never be perfect, that the scars of the past would always be there. But for the first time in a long time, he felt on the right path. Rodrigo had found a new purpose when he approached the social project his father had helped found. Each visit brought temporary relief from the burden he carried. He dedicated himself wholeheartedly, organizing fundraising campaigns, talking to at-risk youth, helping to organize vocational training courses. For a brief period, he felt like he might be able to redeem himself, but life would not spare him so easily. The scandal surrounding the company he worked for continued to haunt him. Despite being preventively removed, the investigation revealed serious flaws in contracts Rodrigo had signed without proper review. His lawyers claimed he was merely a pawn used by high-ranking executives, but the media treated him as one of the culprits. His name was mentioned daily in negative reports. Partner companies refused to hire him. Former friends avoided contact. Even the social project began to suffer consequences, as some sponsors backed out upon learning Rodrigo was involved. One afternoon, when he arrived for a project meeting, he was called by the coordinator, the same woman who had welcomed him for the first time. "Rodrigo, we need to talk." "Did something happen to the young people?" he asked, worried. "No, but some donors are backing away. They say they can't associate themselves with your name now. I know you're trying to get back on your feet, but the project's image is at stake." Rodrigo felt the ground open up. "Do you want me to step away?" "It's not that, but maybe it's best if you stay a little less involved for now. Just until things calm down." He nodded silently. feeling rejected again. As he left, he passed in front of the car mirror and barely recognized his own reflection. Tired eyes, stubble, hunched shoulders. He, who had once been a symbol of success, was now just a man trying to survive his own failure. The luxury apartment became a prison. Rodrigo would spend entire days without speaking to anyone. He tried calling Isabella, but she didn't answer. He sent messages to old colleagues, but got no response. Every notification on his phone was a reminder that he was alone. His financial resources began to dwindle. Without a job or contracts, he had to sell his imported car and drastically cut his expenses. Pride prevented him from reaching out to distant relatives. After all, he was the one who had distanced himself from everyone. The nights were the worst. Rodrigo would lie in bed and think about his father. He remembered the smell of the breakfast Ernesto prepared, the simple conversations at the kitchen table, the patience with which he listened to his complaints. Now his absence weighed more heavily than ever. If I could go back in time, he whispered to himself in a sleepless night. But time did not go back. One morning he received a notice from the bank. He had been in default on his condo fees for 3 months. The building manager called to warn him that if he didn't settle the debt, the apartment could be seized. Rodrigo felt cornered. He tried to sell some assets, but the value of his assets was declining, dramatically. The pressure grew with each passing day. Finally, he received a call from his lawyer informing him that the court had authorized the freezing of his assets as a result of the lawsuit filed against his former company. What was left of his security crumbled. He had to leave his apartment and rent a simple room in a neighborhood boarding house. The contrast was stark. From comfort and status, he went on to share a bathroom with strangers and live on the bare minimum. How did I get to this point? He wondered, looking at the peeling walls of his new room. The answer was painful. He had arrived there because he had chosen to live only for himself, because he had abandoned those who loved him most, because he had trusted in values that did not sustain a true life. Rodrigo tried to maintain contact with the social project, but realized he was becoming a burden. The young people still respected him, but the coordinators were overwhelmed, trying to rebuild the institution's reputation. One night, as he was leaving the place, he was approached by one of the boys, a 15-year-old teenager named Vinicius. "Rodrigo, why don't you come here anymore? We miss you." Rodrigo smiled sadly. "Things are complicated for me, Vinicius, but I haven't forgotten about you." The boy nodded. "My father abandoned me when I was little. I thought you would be different." The words were like a knife. Rodrigo remembered Ernesto, alone in the apartment, waiting for a visitor who almost never came. "Sorry, Vinicius," he said, his voice breaking. "I'll try to be different." With no money or prospects, Rodrigo began working as a delivery driver. He spent hours on the streets, braving sun and rain to earn enough to survive. It was humiliating for someone who had once been at the top, but there was no alternative. On one of his deliveries, he recognized one of the streets in the neighborhood where he'd grown up. He decided to stop in front of his father's old apartment. The gate was rusty, the windows boarded up. He felt a lump in his throat as he remembered the day he'd left Ernesto behind. While observing the facade, a lady approached. "Rodrigo? Is that you?" It was Donacida, the neighbor who had so often taken care of Ernesto. "It's me, Donacida. It's been a while." "That's right, my son. You know, I still remember the day your father left. He talked about you until the end. He said he understood your choices, but that he missed you." Rodrigo lowered his head. "I should have stayed, Donacida. Now there's no point in blaming yourself anymore. What you can do is be someone he would be proud of. The rest, only God can solve." Her words resonated deeply. Rodrigo realized he needed to truly change, not just survive. Days later, he received the news he feared most. The case against him had moved forward, and the sentence could include prison time. His lawyers were still trying to reverse the situation, but the chances were slim. Rodrigo felt at rock bottom, alone, broke, threatened by the law. He spent the night wandering the city streets aimlessly. He stopped in a square and looked at the sky. "Father, I failed you, and now I'm paying for it all." He closed his eyes and remembered Ernesto's letter, the forgiveness he had offered him. That memory brought a glimmer of hope. Perhaps there was still a way. The next morning, he sought out the social project coordinators and offered to work full-time as a volunteer. "But Rodrigo, you have your own problems," said the coordinator. "Exactly for that reason. I need to do something that makes sense. If I wait for life to get better, I'll lose myself forever." They accepted. Rodrigo began helping on all fronts: cleaning, distributing food, mentoring young people. He received nothing in return, but he felt alive for the first time in a long time. Still, he knew justice awaited him, and the trial was scheduled for 3 months from now. Rodrigo felt he was reaching a point of no return. The past weighed heavily, the future was uncertain, but the present gave him some peace. One night, as he was wrapping up the project after a long day of work, he opened the pocket watch Ernesto had left him. He observed the silent hands. "Dad, I don't know if I can fix everything, but I promise I'll try." The wind blew hard, as if an invisible answer enveloped it. Rodrigo knew the fall wasn't over yet, but for the first time, he was willing to face the consequences. Rodrigo's trial was scheduled for a Monday morning. He spent the weekend in the boarding house's simple room, reflecting on everything that had led him there. He remembered the day he left Ernesto alone in the apartment, the note he had hastily written. That image haunted him every night. His father clutching the piece of paper, unsure when or if he would see his son again. Now, Rodrigo felt he would experience something similar, being ripped away from the life he was beginning to rebuild. He had no illusions about the sentence. The lawyers were honest. The sentence could be 3 to 5 years in a closed prison. He had no way to prove he had simply been used by company executives. He was the perfect scapegoat. In the early hours of the morning before the trial, he couldn't sleep. He got up and opened the pocket watch Ernesto had left him. The hands had stopped for weeks, but Rodrigo kept it with him like a talisman. He held the object tightly, closed his eyes, and spoke softly. "Father, give me strength to face what lies ahead. I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I want to honor what you believed I could be." A strange feeling washed over him, as if Ernesto were right beside him. Rodrigo didn't know if it was just his tired mind, but that feeling brought him an unexpected calm. The courtroom was packed. Journalists jostled to capture every detail. Rodrigo entered with his head held high, but inside he felt like a lost child. The judge read the charges in a firm voice. Rodrigo heard, each word like a weight on his chest: fraud, mismanagement, negligence. The defense attorney presented his arguments, but the prosecution was relentless. They presented documents signed by Rodrigo, emails, and meetings he attended. The narrative constructed portrayed him as a key player in the embezzlement scheme. When the judge asked him to stand to hear the sentence, Rodrigo took a deep breath. "Rodrigo Bastos, after analyzing the evidence presented, this court sentences you to 4 years of semi-open prison. You may progress within the prison regime provided you serve 1/3 of your sentence and demonstrate good behavior." Rodrigo's heart sank. He knew the sentence was harsh, but he still maintained his composure. He didn't cry. He just nodded. 2 officers escorted him to the patrol car that would take him to the prison. On the way, he reflected on how life had taken so many twists and turns. From the luxurious apartment, the prestigious position, the champagne-fueled parties, now he was just another number in the prison system. The prison he was placed in wasn't the worst in the country, but it was still a hostile environment. Rodrigo felt fear in the first few days, the suspicious looks of the other inmates, The constant sound of slamming iron doors, the cold food served on aluminum trays. Everything seemed to punish him. But he decided to approach the experience differently. He began helping out in the prison library, organizing books, and encouraging other inmates to read. Little by little, he earned the respect of some. He also began writing letters, not to specific people but to himself. It was a way to purge the guilt he carried. In one of these letters he wrote, "Father, I finally understand what you meant when you said it was no use gaining the world and losing yourself. I'm trying to find myself even here. I want to believe that you would be proud of me, despite everything." A year passed. Rodrigo was allowed to work outside the prison during the day. The location chosen by the administration was precisely the social project he had supported before his imprisonment. When he arrived at the building, he felt a lump in his throat. It was as if Ernesto were there, guiding his steps. The coordinator welcomed him with a warm smile. "Rodrigo, you have no idea how good it is to see you back." He looked at the young people in the project, many of whom reminded him of himself when he was younger, full of potential, but lacking support. "I won't let you down this time." Rodrigo dedicated himself completely. He participated in workshops, talked to each teenager, and showed them that it was possible to follow a different path. Each story of overcoming difficulties he witnessed healed his own pain a little more. 2 years later, Rodrigo was paroled. The first place he visited was the cemetery where Ernesto was buried. He carried with him his pocket watch, now repaired, and a letter he had written during his most difficult days in prison. He knelt before the grave, placed the watch on the headstone, and read the letter aloud. "Father, I lived the wrong way for too long. I abandoned you when you needed me most. Then I lost myself in pursuit of things that had no real value. I paid the price for every wrong choice, and I know I still carry scars that will never go away. But I want you to know that I'm trying to be the man you always believed I could be. I'm helping the project, supporting young people who might otherwise have followed the same crooked path I did. I can't go back in time, but I can honor your legacy. Thank you for loving me even when I didn't deserve it. You were, and always will be, my last true look." The tears flowed freely. Rodrigo felt a relief he'd never known before. He put his watch back in his pocket and stood up. For the first time in years, he felt like he could move on. Rodrigo returned to the social project that same day. He was greeted by Vinicius, the teenager who had once criticized him for leaving. The boy was now 18 and about to start a technical course thanks to the project's support. "You kept your promise, Rodrigo," said Vinicius. "What promise?" "It has to be different." Rodrigo smiled. He looked around and saw dozens of young people participating in activities, studying, dreaming. He felt a presence beside him, as if Ernesto were there, watching. "Dad, I hope you can see me now," he murmured. At that moment, the pocket watch in his pocket made a small click. He opened it and saw the hands moving. Rodrigo smiled again. He didn't know if it was just coincidence or something deeper, but he liked to think it was a sign. Ernesto's last glance, even though he couldn't see it, was there. And with it, the certainty that he had finally found a way.